In this lesson, we're going to discuss how to help your loved one with eating and brushing their teeth. Now, dementia can affect eating in a lot of different ways. The first and most obvious is that, in the early stages, people might not remember to cook or remember how to cook. We've talked about how some of the first abilities lost are stringing together really complicated multi-step sequences. So cooking is obviously one of those. So people might not remember to cook, and they might rely on already prepared things or convenient foods. They also may not eat a variety of foods. I had a resident move in, and in her intake paperwork, it said that the only thing they'd been able to get her to eat for over 3 months was BLT sandwiches. So that's the only thing she liked, the only thing they could get her to eat. Eventually, we were able to get her to eat other foods, but sometimes people find those things that they like and they're not interested in anything else. They also might not be aware of meal times, and they might eat at odd times or throughout the day, which generally isn't that big of a deal. They also might lose interest in food and eat less. As we age, our taste buds and our sense of smell and our eyes all change, so food might just not be appealing to them. It's also very common for people to forget when they last ate. So you might have lunch at noon, and then at 1:30, people might be looking for lunch again. And they could also not be able to detect when they've had enough food. So they might eat too much. So this is where you come into play and need to make sure you're serving them an appropriate amount of food. So some basic tips to ensure that your loved one eats well. Like many of the other things we've talked about, it can be helpful to have a schedule. So try to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner at approximately the same time. It can also help to free the environment from any distractions. So like TV or too many people talking can kind of overwhelm our loved ones and not allow them to give the food the attention that it needs. We can also limit the amount of food or different types of food we give them at a time to not overwhelm them as well. So if you're having a protein and a side and a veggie, you can experiment with serving one at a time, so it's not too much. And then there are also lots of adaptive products that we can use to help, like colored plates, which we'll explain in a moment here, weighted utensils, can help your loved one to eat independently. We also may need to limit snacks and lock the refrigerator or food cabinets. We do have to be careful with this, though, especially if your loved one is strong. If the refrigerator is locked, there are horror stories of people pulling refrigerators down on themselves. So just be conscientious of that and don't allow that to happen. So these are some of the adaptive products that I was talking about. There's weighted utensils that can be particularly helpful if some of the fine motor abilities are gone and they can't hold the small ones, or if they have tremors. With a little bit of weight to it, the hand will shake a little bit less. You can also bend the heads of them. So if there's maybe some wrist mobility or limited range of motion, you could bend the spoon as seen in the middle picture so they can get the spoon to their mouth more easily. And then the third picture here is a universal hand strap. So these are pretty convenient because you can use the existing silverware that you have. It basically just goes around the hand, and it's good for people that have limited grip strength so that they're not dropping. And this could also be used with a toothbrush as well, or any other utensil. So just a few options for those. Colored plates are also very helpful. We do tend to eat a lot of white foods, and white food on a white plate is really hard, especially for someone with dementia or any vision issues, to kind of differentiate what's what. So a red plate or a blue plate, something like that, can help make that food stand out a little bit more and make it more appealing. This other plate here is actually pretty neat. It's reversible and it has two sides. So the one side has dividers and the other side does not. All these plates too, they have a lip. So, if you think about eating peas or something like that, if you don't have a lip on the plate, you can chase them all around and you're not going to get them on your fork. But with the lip on the plate, it can help with that scooping and help them be able to get the food off of the plate. The second one actually also suctions down to the table, so if you find that your loved one is pushing plates or bowls around, this could be a good solution to avoid it going off the table or making a mess. So some common issues with eating. First one would be not eating enough. In this case, you might want to add more small snacks throughout the day, things that that they like. and give them more time. A lot of times it takes a much longer time for them to eat, whether it's the physical and coordination part of it or just the appetite. Make it an experience and give them enough time to enjoy their food. It can also be helpful to get easier to eat foods, especially as we get into the moderate and later stages. Things like finger foods that they can pick up easily, cheese, vegetables, fruit, little sandwiches, and then cut up your chicken or whatever your protein is into pieces that they can pick up themselves. I'm also a big proponent of kind of melty sandwiches, so like a tuna melt or a grilled cheese sandwich. It's very common for people with dementia to kind of deconstruct a sandwich layer by layer. So they eat the top piece of bread and then they eat the piece of lettuce or the tomato and kind of work their way down. Now, it's not really a big deal if they want to eat it like that and they're getting the food that they need, that's fine. But just for convenience sake and to reduce messes, it can be helpful to have something like that. Wraps can also do the same thing. So if you get a tortilla and you wrap it up, and then if you have some sort of whether cream cheese or something kind of sticky that you can stick it back together, they can pick that up and have the thing as a whole. You can also supplement in higher calorie healthy foods, so things like Boost or Ensure protein shakes, so they are getting the calories and the protein and the nutrients that they need, even if they're not eating a wide array of foods. We've talked about mirroring plenty of times, so kind of using a watch me technique, sit down with people, eat with them, and allow them to take those social cues and say, okay, yeah, we're eating now. And you also may need to increase physical activity. I know that anytime that I work out, by about 11 o'clock, I'm starving. So a lot of times, especially in the later stages, people are living pretty sedentary lives, so there's not a high need for food. And the last thing you want to do is make sure that something else isn't causing this problem. Make sure that the dentures fit right if they have those. Oral pain, so a tooth problem or a problem with the gums could also cause somebody to not eat, and they might not be able to explain that to you or tell you. So kind of keep up on the oral hygiene, which we'll talk about later in this lesson. You can also provide a nice big breakfast. It's the first meal of the day, usually hungry after not eating all night. So if you can get something substantial and nutritious in then, that can help carry them through the day. On the flip side of this, there's of course eating too much. So the first thing we have to ask is this a problem? So if your loved one is diabetic, or if they're gaining weight at an unsafe level, if they've got high blood pressure, or if you financially cannot afford to have them eat as much as they're eating, then it's a problem. But otherwise, I'm a big proponent of quality of life. So food is something they enjoy and they can consume it safely and not cause other problems down the road. I say let them have it. If they are diabetic or have high blood pressure or anything like that, check with your doctor or nutrition specialist to know what foods to limit. You may need to hide items that you don't want them to eat. If you have your chocolates that you love and that's what gets you by, and they might eat the entire bag, you might need to hide it. Get a little creative with your hiding places, especially in the earlier stages. They will probably find them, or you can put them in a locked area. So like I said, you can lock your refrigerator or your cabinets if necessary, but do be careful, especially if your loved one is strong and might be able to pull a cabinet off or knock a refrigerator down or anything like that. It can be very dangerous. I know a lot of the time when I'm eating too much, it's simply because I'm bored and I'm walking back and forth to the fridge and looking for something. So if we do fill our day with activities and things to do, we can eliminate that. And that could be a lot of why they're eating too much. If they do seem to be just constantly eating throughout the day, it may be beneficial to kind of scale down the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So they're a little smaller, a little healthier, so those snacks throughout the day aren't making as much of an impact. So some final tips of eating. Eat together. Research does show that people eat better with company. Avoid foods that are hard to chew or swallow. So you may have to chop things up, or later on even puree things. If your loved one is having trouble swallowing or chewing, I would recommend getting them in to see a speech therapist. And they could advise you and see if you need to do a specialized diet, if you needed pureed foods or thickened liquids or anything like that. You also want to check their mouth at the end of the meal to make sure they're swallowing. So it's very common for people to kind of put food in their cheek and hold on to it and not swallow it. And it can be really hard on the teeth. So we want to make sure that they're swallowing everything. It can help to have them kind of rinse out with water after a meal as well, just to make sure there's nothing kind of hanging out on those teeth. Definitely recommend that you learn the Heimlich maneuver as well. I've had to use it several times over my career, and it is literally a lifesaver. So it does not take very long for an obstructed airway to lead to death, and very often that time required for that is shorter than the amount of time that it would take the EMTs to get to you. So definitely learn that Heimlich maneuver. If your loved one doesn't seem to have much of an appetite, it can help to cook really aromatic foods or trigger the senses. So things like fresh baked cookies, fresh baked bread. If there's a certain spice that they like, you can have them smell that. I always think about when you walk into a Subway and they blast all the air from the bread ovens out there to really kind of stimulate your appetite. And with eating too, we want to also keep an eye on hydration. So sometimes if somebody's eating a lot, we've talked about how signals can get mixed up with dementia. So they might think that they're hungry, but they're really thirsty, and that's why they keep eating. So we do have to keep an eye on hydration and salt. So brushing teeth. Like many of our other ADLs, we want to allow our loved one to do as much of it as possible. So we want to promote those feelings of independence, and we want to let them retain their abilities. So if they can still brush their teeth, or maybe if they just need a little bit of help, we want to do the parts that they can still do. So in the early stages, we might need to set up the toothbrush and the toothpaste and get things laid out and kind of cue or remind them. It can also be really helpful to demonstrate or do it with them. So we've talked about mirroring several times. If you've got two sinks, or even if you've got one sink, if you start brushing your teeth too, they might kind of get the hint and do the same. From a safety standpoint, we do want to be careful if we find that they're swallowing their toothpaste. The same goes for mouthwash. If this is a common occurrence, you might want to think about getting a children's toothpaste or children's mouthwash that has fewer of the chemicals that aren't good for you to swallow. So a little later on in the dementia journey, it can be helpful to use the hand-under-hand technique, which we'll show you in the next slide. And then in the very late stages, you may need to switch to oral toothettes. So they basically look like a sucker, but they've got a sponge on the end. Some of them are flavored, so they can just kind of chew on it, and you can move it around the mouth a little bit, and it's not quite as disruptive as toothbrushing, and it helps get some of the plaque off of the teeth. So this here is the hand-under-hand technique. So in this example, your hand would be on the bottom and holding the toothbrush and the toothpaste, and then you put their hand on top of yours. And this kind of helps with the sensory feedback. You know, if somebody came out of nowhere and started brushing your teeth, that would feel odd. But if your hand was also already up there, you would kind of be more likely to understand what's happening and why it's happening. So some other things to consider with brushing the teeth. So the bathroom is not the only place to brush their teeth, especially if you've got balance problems, they're not standing. It can be hard to kind of get over the sink. So you can just get a little basic spit basin and brush your teeth wherever. If they have a comfortable chair or somewhere where they like to be, you can do it there. You can also be flexible with timing. So particularly if getting up and going to the bathroom and getting dressed in the morning is a bit of a challenge, or if it's upsetting for your loved one, that's probably not the time to try to brush their teeth, because that's really going to push them over the edge. So you might want to give them some time to calm down a little bit, give yourself some time to calm down, and reapproach when they're in a little bit better mood. We do need to remember to take out dentures, clean them and rinse them daily. Do recommend getting a denture brush. And then when you have them out, check them to make sure there's no cracks or chips or anything like that in there, because those can really damage the inside of the mouth. We also want to keep flossing in mind as well. It can be just as important as brushing. So some of those flossing picks or a small brush can help. Water picks are also nice, but you do have to be careful with the water temperature and the pressure and any sensitivity. They also are fairly loud, so that can be startling for someone with dementia, and it's kind of an odd sensation. But if that's something that they used previously in their life or they're early on in their journey, you might be able to build the habit now for them to use that. There are also certain foods that can help with cleaning the teeth. So orange slices, grapefruit, things like that. The acid can kind of break down the sugar and the plaque in the mouth. And then raw vegetables too. So something like a celery that they can chew on that can help kind of keep those teeth clean. So that concludes our eating and brushing teeth lesson. In our next lesson, we're going to talk about bedtime and managing meds. So see you there.